guys, Simon Herbert here. Welcome to today's video. We're going to be looking at macronutrient protein and how that caters into fat loss. Now, if you're on a fat loss journey, you're looking at reducing body fat, some of the key things you need to look at are your training, obviously your diet, sleep, and a number of other things that surround it. But what about looking at the individual foods that we can eat to lose fat? Now, part one today is going to look at protein. Now, the reason we're going to look at protein is because this is the most important macronutrient to start with. There are three macronutrients. We've got protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So when we look at protein, you might have heard that by increasing protein in the diet, we are looking at a satiating effect, and protein is the key macronutrient that we start with first. Now, the reason that we do that is because protein is satiating, it is fuller, it does burn more calories to break down than fats and carbohydrates. And the problem with protein is not many people eat enough protein, but they eat in abundance of fats and carbohydrates. So, looking at today's protein intake, we're going to look at where we can get lean protein from, where we can get fatty protein from. Now, the difference between lean and fatty protein is that lean protein, as it stands, is quite lean. So there's a high amount of protein, very little carbohydrates to some degree, and it's quite low in fat. So obviously we've got a high amount of protein with a lower caloric load per the volume of that food. So we're looking at things like chicken breasts, we're looking at turkey, we're looking at white fish, so we're looking at the white poultry, we're looking at white fish, we're looking at low-fat dairy, so things like low-fat cheese, semi-skimmed or skimmed milk, and then we can also look at beans and legumes. Now the thing with beans and legumes are they are not as high in protein as the circled foods here, so you can see that I've circled these foods simply because they are higher in protein and they are a better source of protein than the non-circled ones such as nuts and seeds and beans and legumes. But that being said, you can still get sufficient amount of protein from beans and legumes, nuts and seeds. Now, beans and legumes contain a little bit more carbohydrate than low-fat dairy, white fish, turkey and chicken. When we look at fatty cuts of protein, as it suggests, there is more fat in that amount of protein. So there becomes more calories per 100 grams than there would be to chicken. So if we take red meat, for example, we look at rump steak or sirloin, we know that it's a lot fattier than its leanest protein source, such as chicken. So we've got a few more calories here from protein and fats. Now, when we look at fatty cuts of protein, we've got red meat, we've got oily fish, we've got eggs, we've got dairy. Obviously, some dairy is quite high in fat. And we've got nuts and seeds. So you can see that I've not circled nuts and seeds because, as I mentioned before, it's got a little bit more fats in there, but it's also got some carbohydrates as well. So things like cashew nuts have got protein, fats and carbohydrates in there. Now, so these variants here, the red meat, the oily fish and the eggs, are relatively very low in carbohydrates and contain more protein and fats. So as you can see, that's the difference between lean protein and fatty cuts of protein. Now, what we'll look at when we first start on a fat loss phase is trying to reduce caloric intake. So this is generally why people veer towards lean proteins a little bit more. The reason that we'd like to have a variant of fatty cuts of protein in there as well is to get some fat into the diet. But we feel that when we look at food diaries of clientele, it's not something that clients struggle to get a lot of fats. So it's not really something that we need to focus on first. So as I mentioned, when we first look at fat loss, one of the key things to do is get more protein in the diet, and this is how you would do it. So part two is going to look at fats, part three is going to look at carbohydrates, then we're going to move on to other areas of what is important to lose body fat. Thanks for checking in, guys. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and share.